G'day guys, and welcome to another Blender Guru tutorial. This is part 2 of the grenade series. So we're going to be taking the grenade that we created last week and we're going to be making it explode. So this right here you can see is the finished result. I'll just play this animation now so you can see it in action. So it's essentially taking the model that we finished and then using the explode modifier to rip it to shreds, as well as that using another particle system to create shrapnel, and we're going to be using the fracture script to create some realistic looking shrapnel, as well as that we're also going to be creating that that glowing explosion effect. So that's really easy. So we're going to be covering a couple of things in this tutorial. I'll just show you just as we as you scroll through this frame that you can see all the different pieces coming together. So it's actually quite easy to put together. So anyway, this is what the finished scene looks like. There's 3 objects there. You've got the main grenade there ripping apart. Then you've got that orange glow in the background and that shrapnel as well. So I'm hoping you guys all did last week's tutorial. If you did, by all means go ahead now and open it up. This is where we left off. We've essentially just got one finished grenade here. Looks good in the lighting and everything is set to go. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to tackle this grenade right here and we're going to make it rip apart. Now the way we're going to do that is we're going to use the explode modifier. Now that's an add-on here, sorry, not an add-on, it's a modifier here, and the way it works is you need to have a particle system set up, and then it uses that particle system to essentially separate the mesh into different segments according to the number of particles. So it's probably best if I just demonstrate it for you. So if we just go now to the particle system, add a new particle system, and if we just leave that as is, if we just hit generate right now, you can see the particles that are being created there. So if we now jump over to the modifier and add an explode modifier, making sure that it's underneath the particle system, it won't work if it isn't, so make sure it's underneath that. And now if you play it, you'll notice that our mesh is slowly disappearing. So it's very quick, very dirty kind of modifier. I mean, the results look good for some things like this. If it's like in very quick succession, you can get away with stuff like this. But if you're doing like a really like slow motion explosion of a house ripping apart or something like that, the explode modifier is probably not really going to fit it. But it works in this situation. So first thing we're going to do is sort of set up the explosion. Now I want the explosion to come in at essentially 1 second into the animation. So I'm going to set the start frame to be 24 and the end frame I want that to be 25. Okay, so now if we play that back now, you should see all the particles being emitted at once and falling. Now the amount of particles is a very big factor in how it's going to look. So if you set this amount to, I don't know, 10, you'll notice that you get some really big size chunks, because basically what it does is it separates that entire mesh and divides it according to the number of particles that you have. So remember before there was 1,000, there was tiny little pieces going everywhere like confetti. Now there's 10, it's too many. So I experimented and I found 75 was around about the right mark. So that's the one we're going to go with. It looks stupid now because they're all just slowly floating down, so don't worry about that. Let me just check everything. Lifetime, set that to 25. It's going to be a very short animation, 2 seconds long. So 1 second as the grenade sort of flies through the air, and then another second as it explodes. So very quick. Now the normal amount, that's very important. That is essentially how fast the particles are going to be emitted from, when it explodes. So if you're doing like a really slow motion explosion, like I did for my little, I did a little test animation, which I'll show you at the end. Yeah, if you're doing like a slow motion one, you could, do like 0.1 or something like that. But we want a fast, realistic one, so we're going to go with 60. So now when we play this back, you can see they all fly everywhere. How wonderful. Now I'll just check everything else is fine. Spin, we don't need any of the physics, that's fine. Rendering, make sure it's set to none, because you don't want there to be any like halos appearing, because otherwise it's going to make a halo for each one of those little points, which is just not good. At least I think that's what it would do, but I don't want to try it. Anyway, everything else should be fine. Make sure you've got gravity on as well. Gravity, unless you're doing like a space animation and someone threw a grenade, there is going to be gravity, so that's make sure you leave that switched on. Everything else is good to go. Now, going back to the explode modifier, you've got a function there called cut edges. Now, I'll just show you, if I just leap into this animation here, just so we can see it occurring. You can see the edges of this shrapnel here are rather jagged. Looks kind of pixelated, essentially. It doesn't look very realistic. So if you turn on cut edges, you'll notice that it kind of smooths them out and makes them appear a lot more like shrapnel. So always leave that turned on, and that'll lead to a lot nicer looking results. Another one we're going to add is the solidify modifier. We used that in last week's tutorial. We're going to use it again now. The reason for that is, if I'll just show you now, you can see as you turn side on to this shrapnel there is no thickness to it. So that was a problem. I think when it was first introduced in 2.49, everyone said, wow, the explode modifier looks great, but everything looks like confetti. And that was a common problem. But now that we've got the solidify modifier, you can add that after the explode modifier right here. Make sure it's after it. Don't put it before it. And if I set this thickness to be 0.1, you can see now each of these pieces here has a thickness value. So that's eliminated that problem that was there before where every explosion looked like confetti. So now one thing you'll notice is that it kind of has this weird kind of shading effect. Everything's kind of smooth and awful looking. So add an edge split modifier and place it after the solidify modifier and set the splitting angle to be, let's go with 60. I think 60 should be fine. You just want to make sure that it's essentially where that edge is. You've got a nice clean cut to that edge. That's essentially what we're doing. Now, the other cool thing about the, the solidify modifier is you can actually apply different materials to the inside of the object. Because our grenade is green on the outside, essentially, or presumably, because it's been painted that way to camouflage with the environment. But the inside of it is going to be obviously a lot more gray, metal, metallic-y looking. I'm entirely guessing there. I have no idea what color the inside of a grenade is. But we're going to simulate that by adding a separate material. We're just going to place it under here, and I'm just going to call this inside metal. Turn the specularity off, and now go back to the solidify modifier. And if I just hit, I think this is the inside, yeah. So essentially what these numbers here is the number of materials. So this being material 0 and this being material 1, and then if you add another material, it's going to be material 2, 3, 4, etc. So you would just set this to whichever one is fitting. So if I just change that to 1, you'll see that now the inside of the grenade now has that white material applied to it. And this one over here is the rim. So if I set that to 1 there again, then you've got that. So you can have a material on the inside face, and then another material on the rim, and then another material on the outside. So there's lots of customization you can do there. But, you know, I'm just going to use one material for both of them because I think that should be fine. I'm going to make it a lot darker, though, to blend in with the grenade. And I think that should be fine. Okay, cool. So save that there. I'm going to get a drink of water. Okay, cool. Alright, so now we've got the grenade exploding. What we want to do now is create some smaller looking shrapnel. Because really the idea of a grenade, as sickening and as awful as it is essentially to create really fine shards of shrapnel, which is then going to be lodged into the enemy. So having this like this, it'd be essentially just like, you know, setting out like a Lego grenade or something like that. Have these tiny, you know, these big shards flying everywhere. Really what we want is for some really tiny looking shards as well as these main chunks here. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to be adding a separate object. Add this UV sphere, just going to scale it down a bit, and then scale it along the Z axis by hitting S and then Z. Okay, you just want it positioned in there nicely so that it's not visible. Okay, and the reason we're making this a separate mesh, by the way, is although it's annoying having like another object there inside another one, if you added it here, it would cause problems with this explode modifier. I tried it, just wasn't worth the hassle. So just have a separate object. Now we're going to give this a particle system. I'm going to make it 5,000 particles. That's the number of shards that are going to be emitted. And I want this, let's just check the start and end. So we've got 24, 25 there. Going to do the same for this one. 24, 25. The lifetime, the same again, 1 second lifetime, so it's going to disappear after that. And the velocity, we want to set that to 50, and we want to set the random to be 10, okay? And make sure you also change it from jittered to random so that it emits it in a random fashion. So now when we play that, you should see that we have that then. And you can kind of make out lines of where the particles are appearing. It's not really going to be that obvious from the camera's point of view. If you want, you could make it 20 perhaps. Maybe make that 40 instead. Let's just try that now. I didn't actually have this problem with my animation. Like all the particles just somehow looked good when they first came out, and I didn't have to use random. But anyway. Anyway, that's it's looking pretty good so far. I think that'll do. Now what we need for an object to appear at each of these particles. Because essentially if you were to render this right now, you would essentially see what looks like stardust flying out of the grenade, because each of these little dots would show up as a white glaring halo effect, which you don't want. So we need to create an object for there to be shards, essentially. Now you could, if you wanted to, just create like a cube and then like model it, and I've done that in the past with other tutorials, and you do get some, you know, realistic enough looking shrapnel. But what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to use something called the Fracture Me script. Okay, so you should have that enabled in Blender. So if you just go and type in fracture, you should have what's called their fracture tool. So turn that on. And then the way this works is essentially you need to take a starting object right here and then type in fracture, and you should see what there appears is fracture object. You then click that, and then you bring up the toolbar and you have these options here. Now I should state before we do anything now is that this script is very, very alpha in the sense that it's very prone to bugs. It frequently crashes Blender. Sometimes it just doesn't work. There's many problems with it, but it does a good job when it does work. So that's why I'm trying to use it. However, I don't know how it's going to perform when I do this, but let's hope it works. Essentially, you define the number of shards there, and that's essentially what it's going to do. Is it's going to split that object there into 50 objects. Okay, so that makes sense. It's essentially just going to create several cuts through there, and you should have little bits of cube. Now, once you've got everything set up, you can change, you know, flat, rough if you want to. Once you've got it set up, you just hit execute, and it hasn't done anything. As I said, it's a little bit of a alpha software. I found this problem before, and I was hoping it wasn't going to do it for the tutorial, but it's happening now. So what I'm going to have to do is open up a new Blender window, and I'm just going to have to run that script just from within a new Blender window and then import it into the other one. It's a little bit cumbersome, but you know, it's what you got to do if you want to use this script. So I'm just going to do it now, just very quickly, do exactly what I did before. Fracture object, here we go. Let's set that to flat rough. Let's go for 50 shards and then hit execute. You can see Blender's whirring away. Everything's frozen for a moment. Maybe it's frozen forever. No, it actually made it through. Okay, cool. So now what we have here are separate pieces of the cube. So as I said, it works really, really well when it works. If you use too many shards, sometimes it just completely fails and just Blender crashes. Other times it works like this, so that's good. It's a good result. By default, I think it's made all the objects have a smooth shading, so I'm going to set that to flat for one. And yeah, the other cool thing that we can do is if you could have this as just the shards like this, but I want to get a little bit more fancy. What I want to do is I want to give different colors to the outside of this mesh, essentially. So I want to make it look as though this cube has been painted like green, and then the inside has a metal color, essentially what the grenade is right now. So the way we're going to do that, I mean, if you wanted to, you could go through and like manually select all of these, give it a separate material, etc. It'll be very boring and cumbersome. So we're going to do something a little bit quicker. First of all, though, we're just going to give a material to it, and this is just going to be inside shrapnel. Let's set this to be a gray color, turn the specularity off. Now I'm going to select all of those objects at once, and I'm going to hit Control J. Okay, so it's now one object. I know what you're thinking, Andrew, how are we going to get those back? Don't worry, we'll get it back soon. And now in I think that's solid view mode. Okay, it has to be in solid view mode, and you have to make sure that this is checked. Okay, so what we're going to do now is I'm going to press C, and that's going to bring up the circular select tool. Make sure that you're on face select mode as well. And now if we just paint over this, we can select the outside faces very, very easily like that. And now what I can do is give it a new material. Let's call this outside shrapnel. And let's make this a green color, sort of a darkish green color like that, and then hit assign. So now the inside of it should be gray and the outside should be green. Now to separate these back to their individual objects again, I'm going to select all of it at once, hit P, and then select that will essentially separate it, and we're going to select by loose parts. Okay, and it's now given us back each one of those individual pieces. The only problem is that the origin point is now set the same for all of them, like that one center origin point there. So I'm going to select all of them again, hit Control, Shift, Alt, C, and then select Geometry to Origin. Whoop, no I'm not. Origin, I've just forgotten, I had a complete memory blank. Anyway, it's the middle one, Origin to Geometry, if that, anyway, whatever. Okay, so now that you've got that, if you now pull it apart, you should see separate pieces, colored on the inside and painted on the outside. So that is that's essentially now given us a whole bunch of different objects which we can use as shrapnel. Before we go on though, I thought I'd just take a moment to just share with you one little cool thing I discovered the other day, and it's really cool. Is once you've fractured something like this, if you press O and then you move that object, it's now moving it proportionally, okay? And it's now separating it like that. And what you can do is you can actually animate this. So if I just go to this top view mode here, select all of them, hit I, and then lock rot. So that's going to place a keyframe for the location and the rotation for each of those pieces. And then if I move to say frame 100, like that, and then moved all of them, then select all of them again, and then hit I, and then lock rot, they now all move. So it's a really kind of, I don't know, it was just something cool I thought was awesome that you could animate things cracking and breaking apart like that. And I just thought I'd share that with you. In fact, this is what I use to do my final animation that I'll show you at the end there. But yeah, anyway, that's really unrelated and it's kind of pointless. But I just thought I would share it with you because I know you guys like to learn new tips and things like that. So there you go. Alright, so I'm just clearing those keyframes. Okay, cool, awesome. So now to use these as shrapnel, what we need to do is create a group out of them. So I'm going to hit Control G. They're now all selected green, which means they're now added as a group. And I'm just going to call it shrapnel. Now I've got to name this file because remember this isn't the grenade file. This is a separate one because I'm importing it. Anyway, let's just call this shrapnel dot. And I'm just going to hit Save As Blender File. Go back to the main scene here, and I've now got to hit File, Append. Again, you might not have to do this because your version of Blender might work with the fracture script, but I have to go through all these loopholes in order to make it work. Fracture tut, here we go. And now we should have the cube added. Perfect. So I'm going to move it to a separate layer now so it's out of the way. Got this cube here. And because this is all one solid group, they're all named under the same shrapnel 1 there. Now we can take this particle system, go down to the render options, and then select group, then select shrapnel, hit pick random, and you can also turn up the randomized size as well. So it gives them all little randomized sizes. And now each one of those particles is one piece of that cube that we broke up with the fracture script. So it's pretty cool, pretty effective way to get some realistic looking shrapnel essentially. So it's looking pretty good so far. Shrapnel's all coming out nicely. The grenade is now breaking up. Now what's left to do is to create that explosion effect. Sorry, not the explosion effect. That orangey fire glow effect emitting from the inside of the grenade, basically. My Blender's going a little bit slow now because I've got too many particles showing. So just underneath display, I'm going to change that to be 10%. And that's going to, yeah, my graphics card is going to thank me for that. Cool. Awesome. Now, we're going to add another object to create that orange glow effect, and it's essentially going to look exactly like our egg in the background. So I'm just going to add a UV sphere, and then position it essentially in the same place, like so. You could duplicate the other one, but whatever. Okay. Now what I'm going to do before we move on is I want to give it just kind of like a starry type, you know, just so that it's not a complete sphere like that, because that just looks very, very obvious to the viewer when you see like this giant orange glowing egg just appearing. It just looks weird. So I'm just going to add a displacement modifier now. I'll just see if we've got any textures here that we might be able to use. Any of these? I don't know. Whatever. Let's go ahead and add a new texture. So I'm just going to add texture here. Just going to make that 0.015. Uncheck that. I'm just going to call this displace. And then we're going to use that there for our sphere. I'm going to add a subsurf modifier. I'm going to place it above that that displacement modifier. It's just going to give it more vertices to work with, essentially. Okay, pretty cool. Now we're going to give a material to this this sphere here. So I'm just going to select the color of it, make it an orangey color like so. So slightly pale like that. Turn the specularity off. Turn the shadeless on. And everything else should... Oh yeah, turn traceable off as well. That's just going to speed up the render times. I'm just checking everything else should be fine. Now you might think I'll turn on emit value or something like that. Shadeless will essentially take care of that. We're going to be using this in the compositor on a separate render layer to create the glow effect. So now that you've got that set up, if you go over to the layer section over here, and we're going to add a new render layer, and we're going to call this explosion glow. And we need to move this object to a separate layer, a separate physical layer. Okay, so it's just like that. And we now need to select that layer here to be rendered as the render layer, essentially. So I click that there, and uncheck that render layer from the main one, essentially. Okay, so we've now just got that there. And for the explosion glow layer, make sure you check all Z. And that means that if there's any shrapnel that's in front of that object, is that it won't render the glow behind it, if that makes sense. You might also want to turn on vector blur, because that's going to enable us to add motion blur to that effect later on. And also for the main render layer as well, turn on vector blur as well. It's just going to save us some time later on. Anyway, let's give this a quick render now, and let's see how it looks. Let's just check. Actually, the particle system in the background, our egg object there, make sure underneath render you uncheck emitter, otherwise it's going to try and render that sphere there. So make sure you uncheck emitter. Anyway, let's give this a render now, see how it looks. If everything's done correctly, we should see shrapnel looking good, glow looking good, and the glow on a separate render layer. Okay, that was one other thing I forgot to mention. The glow, need to uncheck sky so that you don't get that background plate rendered in with it. Otherwise, you're going to have problems trying to make the glow work. So uncheck sky, give it another render. And there we go. So it's looking much like a grenade exploding. So going to jump over to the compositor now, and we're going to add in that explosion glow effect. Okay, like this. Now it's not glowing, it's just the name of it. We're going to have to add that glow. So this is essentially that render layer right now. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to enable, actually no. One thing we've got to do is we need to actually animate this spiky ball expanding, okay? Because what we want to do is we want to make it so that as our shrapnel explodes outwards, that this little spiky ball in the background grows with it, essentially. So going back to frame 25 there, I'm going to add, or is it frame 20? Frame 24. I'm going to add a keyframe right there, and just make sure it's scaled so it's underneath the grenade entirely. I'm going to add a keyframe for the scaling, like that. And then just scroll through till it's about there. Let's go frame 30, yeah? And, whoop. Just expand that outwards to about, I don't know, there. It's about fine. And I'm going to add another keyframe there. So you should now see it expanding outwards like that. But that's not all. We also need to animate this material fading away. So I'm going to turn on transparency. And on frame 24 here, I'm going to hit I on the alpha, because at the start of the animation, we want this material obviously to be full blowing, showing, and making it look glowing. I don't know what that means. And then 5 frames into it, we essentially want it to fade out over time. So at frame 30, I'm then going to change that value to 0 and then add another keyframe. So if you now play it backwards, you should see that material slowly disappearing, or slowly appearing and disappearing like that. Okay, cool. Just also make sure that it is entirely hidden from view like that before it's... Let's position that there. Okay, cool. Scaling. Excellent. Okay, so now if you play through it, if done right, there is one other thing, is that at the start of this, you'll notice that it doesn't explode as fast, and it kind of slows down near the end as well. The reason for that is, of course, by default, the F-curve modifier is creating these nice sloped looking curves there. So I'm just going to select, because we've got this object here selected, I'm going to select all of those curves there, hit V, and then select vector, and then now sharp curves like that. So you should now have a continuous animation from start to finish like so. Okay, cool. So now if we jump to whatever frame we were on before. Okay, and now if I give this another render, what it will allow us now to do is add a motion blur effect to that explosion in the background. And because it's rapidly scaling upwards and expanding, it'll create a nice, really blurry type of effect. And previously I faked that with my my final scene just by using a node in the compositor, which created kind of a zoom blur effect, but that was really dodgy and it doesn't work that well. So I found a better method is to just go in the compositor, add a vector blur node like so, connect them up just like this, add a viewer node, and you should now see that you now have that kind of zoom type glow effect there, and it just adds a little bit more oomph to the image and makes it look like it's moving really, really fast. You can change the samples, is because you can see how speckledy that that motion blur effect is. So the more samples you have, the smoother it looks. And the blur effect is essentially how much blur that that object gets. Basically, pretty simple. Now to get the glow effect, we're going to add 2 other effects. So we're going to add this blur node in here, set it to fast Gaussian. Going to go relative, select Y, and then we're going to go 5% for both. You can add more or less of a glow effect depending on what sort of effect you want to go for. I'm now going to add in a glare node as well. Connect it straight after that vector node, making sure, of course, you don't just connect it straight here, or else you're going to miss that entire motion blur effect. Going to add this in here. We're going to go for that. We're going to leave it at streaks. I'm going to turn the threshold down to 0. The mix all the way up to 1, like so. And I'm going to set the streaks to be, I don't know, 7. I think 7 is pretty good. That's fine. And we want to connect these 2 effects together by adding a mix node, like so. Set that to add 1. And then we need to drop this somewhere appropriately up here. Okay, so you got the color balance node there. That's showing through there, which is giving it that glow effect, kind of wrapping around it. I'm going to drop it in about here. Okay. So just after that color grading. Okay, I'll just check. Yeah, I'll just name this just so it's easy to remember later on. That's vignette. Okay, cool. So it's a really kind of glaring look of an effect. You can turn it down or up, like how much of it shows through there, just by changing that add value. I think I just left mine at 1. I thought that was all right. It's not too bad. If you want, if it's like too blurry, you can change the motion blur effect to about I don't know, 0.5 or something. That's all right. But anyway, it's going to get less as the animation goes on anyway, because obviously our transparency effect there gets less and less as the animation moves forward. Okay, so rest is pretty good. What we want to do is add a vector motion blur effect to our shrapnel as well, because currently it's looking pretty static in the background. So I'm just going to duplicate that vector blur node there, connect it in like so, and just drop it before the sharpen. I don't know if that's going to be any good. Okay, and turn on curved as well. Actually, that's something we should have done for this one down here as well. So turn on curved, and that essentially makes it blur in front and behind of the animation. So you don't get like a comet tail effect, you get a realistic motion blur effect essentially. And we're going to need to use more samples for our shrapnel because they're moving quite fast, as you can see in the background. And I don't know if you're going to come across this problem, maybe it's already working for you, but you'll notice that my main object there with the particles of that, the parts of the grenade that are ripping apart, they don't have any blur on them, and I honestly don't know why that happens sometimes. But yeah, it's kind of annoying. I don't really know why. It applied it to the fine shrapnel, but I didn't apply it to these ones here. So I'm going to try baking the cache of our particles here. So I'm just going to hit bake all dynamics. Shouldn't take too long, and maybe that will clear up the problem. I'm hoping it will. Almost there, 100%. Good, awesome. Okay, so let's just go back a bit. Give that a render now. And hopefully it decides to calculate the motion blur on every object, not just selectively. Okay, so the main parts of the grenade, they're still having that problem. Shrapnel's looking great. Yeah, I mean, I honestly don't know why it's not working now. It's just one of those things you run into. Well, I'm not really anything I can do to fix that right now. It's probably working for you, so I'm just going to leave that right there. So just now we've got a bit of time. I thought I'd just show you how to animate the grenade moving towards the camera. Because if you looked at our starting animation here, you can see that it's being thrown off screen towards the camera, and then it explodes. So it's really easy to do that. All you need to do is essentially create an empty, and I'm just going to scale it up just so it's bigger to see, and also because I can always have trouble finding my empties later on, I'm just going to change the shape of this to sphere. That's just going to make it a lot easier to yeah, essentially see later on. And we need to select all the grenade objects there, and select the empty last and hit Control P, and now if you move that empty, the entire grenade should move with it. Now what we want to do is jump to frame 24. Now that's the start of the explosion, and I'm going to hit I and then select lock rot, so location rotation, and it's going to create a keyframe at frame 24. And the reason we're doing that is of course because we want it to explode right here. So now we can jump to frame 1 of the animation by hitting shift left arrow like that. And now we essentially need to move this grenade to wherever we want it to be thrown from. So let's just see how big it looks over there. Okay, so it's still looking quite big. I'm just going to move it out a little bit further even. Okay, so somewhere like that, and it's moving rather slow. I'm just going to turn the subsurf down for the grenade. Okay, now you can move it a little bit faster. Now I just want to rotate this. Whoa. Okay, rotate from the bounding box. Okay, I just want to rotate it like that, so it's kind of being thrown and it's like spinning forward towards the camera, like that. And I'm just going to, as well, rotate it sideways. Okay, so now if I hit I and then select location rotation, now when we play it forwards, you should see that occurring, which it doesn't look too good. Let's go to frame, let's set that to frame 50. It's kind of like it's coming in from space or something, like whew, boom. Yeah, it looks rather strange. So the other thing we need to do is go to the F-curve modifier, and in order to make it look like it's being thrown up in the air and then towards the camera, we need to essentially fake, yeah, just do it by hand essentially using these curves here. So it's hard to see which one of these curves is which. So just click that cursor button down there, and that essentially hides everything else that isn't associated with that empty there. And then if you hit the home key, now it gives you a nice kind of localized look at all those F-curves there. So it took me ages to figure that out. You press home key and suddenly you can see everything clearly. Anyway, Okay, cool. So you want to get this Z rotation right there, and then just in the middle of the animation, I'm just going to click up. And essentially what that's going to do is now if you animate forward, you should see the grenade is being thrown through the air, just like that. And then, you know, the more you make that, then, you know, the higher or lower it goes. It's essentially like looking at, you know, the path of the grenade, just looking at it in an F-curve form. So it's essentially moving exactly like that. In fact, if you went to the other side of it, it is you can actually see the path of that grenade being thrown, just like that. So to get it more like a realistic looking arc, I'm going to scale that outwards like that. And I just want to position it so it's more in the middle of that animation right there. And then these two endpoints, they need to be vectors. If I can grab them. Hard to grab. There we go. Vector. Let's move that in. And that one in. So that it starts out really quickly. And then goes forward like that. So I might just scale that down a little bit. The arc's a little bit too much. Okay, I don't know how that's going to look. Let's hope that looks good. Alright, maybe it's a little bit too high, I think. I didn't check the height of it before. Alright, that's alright. Sometimes you can just scale down. Just scale it down like that, and that can help as well. And one other thing I might do, I might just move it out by one frame, I think. Just so that it starts to explode. So it doesn't just like roll forward, then stop, and then explode. You want the explosion to start just before the grenade stops, essentially. So something like that, I think, should be fine. Not sure if the rotation is alright. Yeah, it's not too bad, actually. And, yeah. Let's just give that another quick render right now. That should essentially be it, guys. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, everyone. What I'll show you right now is a quick animation that I created using this method for the grenade. I got a bit bored. I thought I'd try and do something creative, so I went for kind of like an abstract type of approach to this this grenade look. So yeah, let's roll the animation, and thanks very much for watching the tutorial. See you next time.